Retail workers, what was your get out experience with the customer? When I was younger, I worked at a ski resort, specifically in a ski rental shop, where my job was to fit boots and size skis for customers. In my first year, I worked at what was essentially the Walmart of ski rentals. This was the biggest and cheapest rental shop in the area, which made it incredibly popular. During the Christmas season, the place was a madhouse. The store would have lines stretching out the door every single day, with people waiting to get their gear and strike the slopes. The sheer volume of customers was overwhelming. The closest town to the resort had a permanent population of fewer than 10,000 people, but during the Christmas holidays, that number would skyrocket to around 70,000 as tourists flooded in to enjoy their winter vacations. Managing the influx of people was chaotic, to say the least. I distinctly remember looking at my paycheck after the 2 weeks surrounding Christmas and realizing that I had clocked in 119 hours. It was an exhausting experience, absolutely insane, but it taught me a lot about hard work and dealing with pressure. The Christmas rush at the ski resort is something I'll never forget. It was a true test of endurance and patience. One day, it was business as usual, pure mess with a quarter-mile line stretching out the door and a constant stream of people needing assistance. I was stationed at the bench closest to the entrance, helping a woman with her ski boots when this kid walked up to my bench. He looked young and he seemed pretty sure of himself. I asked him if I could help, and he told me he had reserved rentals online and wanted to pick them up. I responded politely, explaining that this was indeed the correct store, but if he had a reservation, he'd need to join the back of the line like everyone else, and we'd assist him as soon as we could. And that's when things took a turn. The kid, standing there with all the bravado one could muster, said, "This is nonsense," right in front of the customer I was helping. I took a deep breath and told him calmly that, quite literally, every piece of equipment in our store was reserved just like his. Every single person in front of him also had a reservation, and we were doing our best to help everyone as quickly as possible. But instead of understanding, he started being rude to me personally. He called me names and threatened to escalate the concern to anyone who would listen because we weren't letting him skip ahead of hundreds of people doing the exact same thing he was. Now, for some context, I'm 6'3" and pretty big. This kid, on the other hand, was maybe 5 foot something and like 120 pounds, soaking wet. So when he called me names, I couldn't help but literally laugh in his face. I wasn't threatened by him in any of the slightest ways possible. If anything, it was more amusing than anything else. The woman I had been helping finished up and left, and I continued to laugh at the kid as I called the next person in line. And that's when he lost it. He started yelling at me, furious that I wasn't helping him and probably even annoyed that I found his tantrum amusing. It was a surreal moment dealing with this kid's outburst while surrounded by a sea of people all trying to get their ski rentals. Despite the craziness, I kept my cool, knowing that at the end of the day, I'd seen and handled much worse. Up until this incident, I had little to no respect for my manager. He had always been a pain, and I wasn't a fan of his management style. He was the kind of boss who seemed to thrive on making everyone's life more strenuous, and the Christmas rush had only amplified his unwelcome demeanor. But even he had his limits, and it turned out that this snotty kid was a perfect prey for him to release off some steam. After the kid started yelling, cussing at me in front of the customers, I decided enough was enough. I went over to my manager and explained that this kid was not just being rude, but was personally calling me names and creating a scene in the store. My manager, who had been dealing with the same relentless chaos all week, saw this as an opportunity to assert some authority. He walked over to the kid and, in a calm, almost too polite tone, he said, "I'm sorry for the confusion. What's your name so I can take a look at your reservation?" The kid's face lit up. He thought he had finally won. He assumed that by throwing a tantrum and causing a scene, he had successfully gamed the system and would be whisked to the front of the line. My manager asked him to wait for a moment, then went to check the reservation system. The kid was beaming, clearly thinking he had outsmarted everyone. A few minutes later, my manager returned holding what I'm sure was a printed copy of the kid's reservation, although everything was digital. I think he went out of his way to print it just for the added dramatic effect. He walked up to the kid, held the paper up, and said, "I found it." The kid's smug smile grew wider, but before he could bask in his triumph, my manager did something completely unexpected. He looked the kids in the eyes and, with a deliberate motion, ripped the reservation in half right in front of his face. The kid's jaw dropped as my manager leaned in and said, "Don't ever treat someone who's trying to help you like that. You are never allowed in our store again, and with every other store in town also being completely 100% booked on equipment, good luck skiing this week." The kid stood there, stunned as the reality of the situation sank in. Even though I still didn't like my manager, at that moment, I gained a new level of respect for him. He'd stood up for me when it counted, and that earned him at least 1 point in my book for the rest of the season. It didn't make him a great boss, but it showed that even he had a sense of fairness when it came down to it. Pure gold, this stuff is. That kid thought he was able to pull a fast one, only to get struck with the most satisfying plot twist of his life. Props to his manager for going that extra mile and delivering the ultimate Christmas smackdown. Story 2. I was a teenager and worked at a local grocery store in the produce department. Beyond regular duties, we made fruit trays on weekends. Nothing fancy, just a variety of fruits in large red bowls. Dude comes in after 10 p.m. and we are closing at 11. He asks for a tray with specific fruits. I tell him we unfortunately don't make custom trays. The teenage boy who was also on shift with me eavesdrops and says it's slower tonight so he can do it for him. He says, okay, good. No gratitude displayed at all. This coworker of mine is always extra kind to customers. It's legitimately admirable. 20 minutes later, my coworker emerged from the back room, carefully carrying the fruit tray he had prepared. With a look of pride, he approached the customer to present it. But the moment the customer laid eyes on it, everything went downhill. He immediately went into a furious tirade, his voice booming with anger as he screamed at my coworker. He then yelled. The bitterness in his words shocked everyone around. Concerned about the commotion, I hurried over to see what the concern was. To my surprise, the fruit tray looked perfectly standard, fresh, and neatly arranged. Yet this guy was not having it. His face was flushed with rage as he continued to scold my coworker, his insults growing louder and more hostile. In a fit of anger, he grabbed the tray and threw it onto the ground, sending pieces of fruit flying in every direction. It was a surreal scene. I couldn't believe he was making such a big deal over something so petty. As he continued to scream about how we were impaired and how we had wasted his time, my frustration boiled over. I had enough of his disrespectful behavior. Without thinking, I stepped forward and snapped, "Get out!" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care at that moment. He immediately postured up, puffing up his chest and glaring at me. Now keep in mind, this guy was in his 40s, ready to pick a fight with some teenagers over a fruit tray. It was absurd. Thankfully, other employees rushed over, joining me and telling him to leave. The situation felt like it was escalating, but I knew we had to stand our ground. As he turned to leave, he spat, "I'll be back for all of you," and stormed toward the sliding doors, his threats hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Luckily, all of this had been captured on camera, and management wasted no time in calling the cops regarding his outrageous behavior and that last threat. Later, we found out that the police had arrested him because he had outstanding warrants. I couldn't help but think, hope the fruit was worth it. It was an extraordinary day, but at least we stood up for ourselves against someone who thought he could belittle us over something so petty. And after a late-night fruit tray showdown, that could have been an episode of Grocery Wars. Story 3. When I was working in the local Mickey D's in the little town I lived in, we would get some sketchy people coming in. This middle-aged guy in not-so-nice clothes came in every day for about a month, and nothing too weird in particular, only that he would fish in our trash cans for the coffee stickers for a free coffee. He would come in with a coffee cup and ask for a refill even though we never served him before that day. The usual junkie thing, right? Well, my manager and I were working late at around 9:30, and he starts pouring salt in his shoes, shakes them, and then pours out the salt onto the floor. Obviously, we're like, what? Now, my manager is my friend, and we know each other pretty well, and she's incredibly awesome at what she does, but confrontations with sketchy customers are not her thing, and she prefers to have somebody with her, preferably with someone tall, just in case. So she takes me and goes up to the guy and tells him not to do that because, first off, don't take your shoes off in the lobby as there are messes with sanitary rules, and this guy had no socks on. And another thing, he's making a mess with his now feet salt. Now, my manager is definitely in my top 5 most beautiful and nicest people I've ever met, and I assume that she gets a lot of unwanted flirtations in her life. But he proceeds to flirt with her to bargain and start pulling up his garments. Needless to say, I don't think she needed me for that confrontation because she did not take that well and told him straight up, "You need to leave right now or I'll call the police, and believe me, you do not want to deal with them today." Her father is the main sheriff, by the way. And now he left, cussing us out while we banned him from the restaurant. Never saw him again. She gave me a free meal card as an apology for seeing her like that. I was just surprised she didn't harm the guy. No other customers came in after that, so we chilled until our shifts ended. To my manager, Kelsey, you're awesome. I miss you. Story 4. This tale takes place roughly 22 years ago at a community college bookstore. As with any college bookstore, the start of the semesters was incredibly busy. In order to help ease the insanity in our little store, we set up a table outside the front door for doing returns. And that's where I was stationed for the day. As people began to queue up, they gradually made their way to my table. Once they reached me, I processed the paperwork for their returns, carefully noting the details and ensuring everything was in order before directing them inside to the cashiers. It's hectic to highlight that I had no cash on hand and no means to process credit or debit cards. My setup was incredibly minimal, just me, a simple table, a stack of paperwork, and a few pens. That was the entirety of my operation, emphasizing the unique challenges of my role in this bustling environment. A middle-aged lady approached my table and it was clear she was not lacking in funds. She explained that her son had dropped all his classes and was returning his textbooks, which was a straightforward transaction. I efficiently completed all the necessary paperwork, handed her back the document, and directed her inside to where the cashiers were. However, things took a dramatic turn when she outburst in anger, going absolutely ballistic about having to wait in line again. I mean, we're talking about a reaction that could start a fight. She was shouting and cursing, completely losing her composure. The customers in line behind her were so taken aback by her behavior that they actually approached my manager to file formal statements about what had transpired. They didn't raise a concern on me, they pointed their fingers squarely at her because they recognized the absurdity of the situation. Feeling the weight of the chaotic interaction, I decided to take a break and shake off the negativity. I reminded myself that everyone has bad days and that I had the backing of those customers who witnessed the entire ordeal. A few days passed, and just when I thought the incident was behind me, my manager received a call that turned the tide once again. It was the president of the college calling to discuss the concern. To my surprise, the woman had escalated the situation all the way to the top and whined about me directly to the president. My manager and I braced ourselves and headed off to a meeting with the president and the irate woman, determined to handle the situation with calm professionalism, right? The president calmly read through the statements, and I watched in disbelief as the woman's face turned a deeper shade of red with each passing second. I don't remember every word he said, but I do recall the term arrogant being thrown around quite a bit, painting a clear picture of how he perceived her actions. The tension in the room reached its peak when he finally looked her in the eye and sternly declared, "Don't waste my time ever again," before escorting her out the door. It was a surreal moment watching someone who had caused so much chaos be dismissed so decisively, reminding us all that respect and patience should be the order of the day. Story 5. I used to work in a comic book store, and one day an older guy walked in with a box of assorted 90s comics. Honestly, they were all pretty much worthless, just a stack of nostalgic junk. He had about 30 of them, and while our usual rate was 10 cents per book, I thought I'd be nice and offer him a flat price of $5 for the whole collection. As soon as I mentioned the price, he arose in anger, claiming that his comics were worth millions. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at that. I replied quite straightforwardly, "You're welcome to keep them if you'd like, but I'm putting them right into my dollar bin, so I'm not going to pay you more." Now, for some context, I was a mid-20s woman working alone in a little store, and he was a grumpy old man in his 60s. To put it mildly, the dynamic was a bit skewed, especially considering this took place in Canada, where politeness is usually the norm. After some back and forth, he finally agreed to my offer, but then made a startling remark. "If I come back and see these books on the shelf for more, I'm going to get my weapon." My jaw dropped. I quickly dropped his box back onto the counter, stepped back, and exclaimed, "Did you just threaten to harm me? Get out, I'm not buying your comics anymore." He tried to brush it off, insisting he was just joking, but I wasn't having any of it. I stood my ground and firmly told him to get out and reminded him that he had threatened my life over a measly $5. Once he left, I closed the store, locked the doors, and took a moment to collect myself. I ended up crying for a while because what kind of person does that? Who threatens someone's life over something so petty? It was a sobering reminder of the bizarre and often distressing interactions that can happen in retail, especially when dealing with a self important person. The whole experience left me shaken, but I knew I had to keep my head up and remember that not everyone is like that. Story 6. Not me saying the get out part, but my manager on my behalf. I had recently experienced a very negative situation at my first job, which led me to quit. I felt incredibly insecure about my appearance and my abilities in a typical work environment due to my achondroplastic dwarfism, which makes me 4 feet tall and gives me a disproportionate appearance. In an effort to regain my confidence, I decided to volunteer at a little town charity shop, and my manager was fully aware of my struggles and the reasons behind my decision. So one day, while I was in the back room sorting through donations, I heard the bell ring, signaling that a customer had entered the shop. I walked in, only to be met with the gaze of a man who stared at me, laughed, and then exclaimed, "Is this Santa's workshop?" I stood there in shock, unsure how to respond to such a bizarre and rude comment. My manager, who was working at the till, immediately sensed the tension and stepped in with a cold, steely voice, saying, "Excuse me?" The man's expression shifted as he realized he had crossed a line. His next words were even more shocking. "Sorry, I did not expect to see someone like that here." Both he and my manager turned to me, and I awkwardly mumbled something like, Well, I am," while shrugging in an attempt to brush it off. It was a moment that could have ended there, but then he made a lethal mistake. He asked, "So, how do you make the toys?" And that was a tipping point. My manager didn't hesitate. She walked out from behind the counter, pointed directly at the door, and firmly stated, "Do not disrespect my staff. Get out." The man's demeanor shifted and he started apologizing profusely, but she was having none of it. "Out," she repeated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Even as he left, he still seemed to find the whole situation amusing, chuckling as he walked out the door. I stood there, a mix of gratitude and disbelief flooding over me. Man, I miss that manager. She was the best. Thank you, Bianca, for standing up for me when I needed it most and for reminding me that I deserve respect in any environment. The world needs more managers just like Bianca. Story 7. I was a supervisor in a store where people could trade in goods for other second-hand stuff. One guy stands out, and I had a lot of imbeciles I dealt with over my 7 years there. This guy had previously bought a phone from us and came back demanding we give him his money back or a new phone, as the one we sold him had a chip. As it is secondhand, we may have missed the hairline chip during our testing. No biggie, so we swapped it. About a month later, he's the first customer of the day and he is cursing us out because his phone isn't working. He has a warranty, so we take the phone, open up the casing, and see what we see. The phone is water damaged, 100% not how we would have sold it since that is the first thing we check out. As tensions escalated, he and his wife began to freak out, their voices rising as they shouted threats to stay all day and warn others against shopping with us. I couldn't help but smirk, thinking, "You're wasting your time here. At least I'm paid to be here." I could tell he didn't appreciate my sarcasm, but he inadvertently slipped up, saying, "If I had known it was water damage, don't you think I would have pulled the sticker off so you guys wouldn't notice?" And at that moment, he essentially confirmed he was trying to pull a fast one on us. It was almost comical how he unwittingly admitted his intentions while still demanding a refund. I knew I needed backup, so I called Center Security to handle the situation. When they arrived, they calmly informed him that he had to leave, but he stubbornly retorted, "This is a public place." I decided to chime in, asserting, "Actually, this is private property and you are banned. You need to get out." My words only seemed to fuel his anger as he defiantly refused to leave when security insisted. That's when they got on the radio to call the cops since he was technically trespassing now. Whose wife, who is just as loud and obnoxious, screeched at him, but their bravado quickly crumbled. They both hightailed it out of the store, leaving behind a cloud of chaos. It all unfolded before I'd even have my morning tea, which made me wonder what other surprises the day had in store. And if you're enjoying the video and wondering, did anything else happen in the store? Please do make sure to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 8. I worked at a mechanic shop where my primary role was to greet customers and gather general information about their vehicles, things like their name, mileage, and any trouble they were having. One day, a guy came in for his appointment after driving about an hour to reach us. At first, the conversation was standard. I asked for his name, mileage, and the usual details without any concerns. But then out of nowhere, he started talking about politics. Knowing this wasn't going to end well, I tried to stay focused on filling out the paperwork while nodding along, hoping to steer the conversation back on track. However, things took a turn for the worse when he said something like, "Black people are ruining this country." This was during Obama's presidency, so I guess that was his train of thought. I was taken aback, not just by the language, but also by the sheer audacity of his comment, especially since we were on the service drive with at least 6 other cars and customers around. At that point, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I firmly told him he needed to leave. We couldn't assist him with his car. He became very enraged, his voice raised as he stepped closer to me, trying to intimidate me. I chuckled to myself because I was playing college football at the time as a defensive lineman, and he was just a tiny older man. There was no way he could intimidate me. But my laughter only seemed to fuel his anger, and he demanded to speak to my manager. By then, I was really grinning. I knew this was about to get interesting, so I walked over to my manager's office and explained the situation. My manager, a black man who had an irrational attitude, looked at me and said, "Not a chance," before heading out to confront the guy. When my manager approached, the mood shifted dramatically. The guy who had been so confident with me suddenly looked less sure of himself. My manager calmly informed him that we would not be working on his car and advised him not to bother returning. The contrast between my manager's authoritative presence and the customer's earlier bravado was striking, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. As the man walked away, I turned to my manager and laughed. That was a funny day. Not just because of the absurdity of the situation, but because it reaffirmed how important it is to stand up against prejudice, no matter where you are. It was a little victory in a world that sometimes feels overwhelmingly chaotic. Story 9. I had an older man come into the store to buy a charging cable, which seemed like a simple transaction. No problem, right? He seemed satisfied with his purchase and left without any concern. However, he returned a week later, and it was immediately clear that the cable was a bit damaged. He was demanding a refund, but I explained that our policy doesn't allow refunds on accessories. Instead, I offered to exchange the damaged cord for a brand new one, thinking that would resolve the concern. Out of nowhere, he slammed his cane on my desk, sending a shockwave through my space, and began cursing up a storm. I was taken aback by his aggression and firmly told him to get out of my store. The whole encounter was absurd. It was just a charging cable. Fast forward to my most recent experience where I sold an iPhone 7 Plus. This phone had been refurbished, but it was literally in such mint condition that I would have used it happily myself. A week or two later, the customer called me complaining that the phone didn't work. Considering I had played with it when I received it and had taken pictures of the device in perfect shape, I was genuinely shocked. We decided to offer him an exchange, suggesting he could pay the difference for a brand new iPhone 8 Plus. I made multiple calls to him when the 8 Plus arrived, but there was no response. Almost a month later, he finally came back, but when he did, I was horrified to see that the phone he returned was bent with noticeable dents on the side. And to make matters worse, the technical concerns he had experienced turned out to be entirely his fault. He hadn't known how to sign into his own YouTube account or turn up his ringer volume. I could tell he was unhappy when I informed him that the phone was no longer in the same condition. Nevertheless, I reassured him that I could still help him get into that brand new iPhone 8 Plus. Instead of paying outright, he asked if we offered financing, which we did through a third party since I worked in prepaid. I explained everything to him and he agreed to the financing, thinking this would be a seamless transaction. After setting everything up again for him, I even went the extra mile and logged into his YouTube account myself to ensure it wouldn't be a broken phone. I thought all was well and that we had resolved the problem until yesterday when I received a call from him. He was furious, claiming he had a problem because the finance company wanted a staggering 20% interest on the total price we financed. He also claimed the phone itself was now at a different price, alleging I didn't give him credit for the damaged iPhone he brought back. To top it all off, he insisted there were air bubbles in the glass of the new phone, something that wasn't there when he left the store. He even complained that an adapter I had given him for free didn't work, despite my explaining that his new phone didn't even come with those adapters. I had just given him one as a courtesy. By this point, I was completely exasperated. I informed him that this was a final sale, and if he was unhappy, he would need to take it up with the finance company because that was their sale now. What a day. Story 10. I worked in a big box home improvement store for about 3 years. I worked my way up to a sales position that was pretty high up. I got the job because everyone knew I could take a lot of struggle to make a sale, but even I had a line. I got assigned to oversee another salesman's install because he had passed away while at the customer's home. I had been briefly involved in the beginning of some advice from the other salesman, so naturally it got pawned off on me. I did some research on the customer. A quick Google search was all I needed. It turns out he was a pretty creepy dude. He had lured women with a high-end job in his natural oil company. I'd figured I'd just get the install finished and be done with him, but of course, things never work out that smoothly with guys like this. Right off the bat, he was messing with the salesman that had passed away. I had to ask him multiple times to stop. He was always making up stories and damaging the product we had already installed to get discounts, and that was just the beginning. Fast forward about a month later, and the majority of his install is finished. Due to some vendor issues, some of the product had arrived wrong. So I scheduled a second install date and got the product fast-tracked. The customer then proceeded to decide that he was going to remodel his home and mess up almost everything we had already installed and blame everything on us. I made multiple phone calls daily to try and communicate with him and resolve the problem, but he would never answer my phone calls and would always call the store manager later. Everyone at the store knew the game he was playing and never let him get anywhere. Anyways, during this period, I got offered a better job elsewhere. I gladly took it and moved on and left the store to deal with this man. A few weeks later, I came to visit my coworker, and sure enough, the customer was sitting at her desk berating her about the same thing that he spewed at me while I worked with him. As soon as he saw me, he came over and started to get in my face. He apparently didn't listen to my voicemail, letting him know I was no longer working for said store. I said something along the lines of, "You need to relax. I no longer work here, and I'm not obliged to take your problems." He made some snooty remark about that it was a good thing, and he knew I got dismissed when I stopped calling him. I responded with, "Get off your high horse and be a decent human being. This whole mess is your fault. I didn't even want to work with you in the first place. I know you're rude and everyone here working with you does too." He stood there and his mouth dropped. I just walked away and left the store. My old manager called me later that day and said that a customer threw a fit after I left and said he was never coming back. Not gonna lie, it felt pretty great to be able to get back in the guy's face. Not many people get the chance without repercussions. Story 11. Back when I was an undergrad, I worked part-time at Macy's, which was a pretty interesting experience overall. One day, I had a customer approach me who seemed a bit impatient from the get-go. He mentioned that he was looking for a specific sports jacket that he had seen listed on the Macy's website, and he wanted to buy it in person at the store. I responded, "No problem, let me check and see if we have it in stock." I went over to my computer, ran the search, and unfortunately, it turned out we didn't have any stock at that location. I informed him of the situation and suggested that I could place an order for him and he could pick it up in just a few days. He immediately replied, "No, I'm going to be out of town." So, trying to be helpful, I offered to have it shipped directly to his home. "No, I want it today," he insisted, frustration creeping into his voice. I then suggested that I could check if another Macy's nearby had the jacket. He replied back, "I already drove all the way here." At this point, I was trying to maintain my composure and provide good customer service, so I mentioned, "Well, you saw it online, right? Why not just order it from the website?" Apparently, that set him off completely. He explained, "I really don't like your smart tone right now." I couldn't help but give him a "what" look. I replied, calmly, "Sir, I'm trying to help you, but you're not making it easy by rejecting every option we have. Why not consider buying something similar?" He interrupted me. "No, I want that one. I bet your manager can get me what I want." I sighed. Okay, he's going to tell you the same thing I just told you. He was relentless, claiming, "Oh, we'll just see about that. You'll be lucky if you have a job after this." I really didn't pay attention to his ranting as I was already calling my manager. When my manager finally arrived, he looked at the guy and casually said, "Oh, it's you. Do I need to call security again?" I couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of vindication. The customer started screaming at both of us, declaring, "This is nonsense. I'm going to report both of you to the corporation." I started laughing at that point and said, "Dude, didn't he just tell you to get out?" Apparently, he wasn't expecting that response and just stared at us, momentarily speechless. My boss, trying to keep a straight face amidst the chaos, chimed in, "Well, you heard him. Get out." The whole encounter felt surreal, but I left work that day with a story that still makes me chuckle. Story 12. I'm Canadian, and one day at work, we had a new employee join the team. It was his first week, and he was still getting the hang of things. A customer called the store, inquiring about the price of a product if we were to order it. Unfortunately, the new employee mistakenly quoted the price in US dollars instead of Canadian dollars. When the customer came into the store, she was furious and demanded that we sell her the product for the price she had been quoted over the phone. We assessed the situation and explained that selling the product at that price would result in a significant loss for us, about negative $200. But rather than understanding the business implications, she began to argue back, exclaiming, "I'm here trying to support local business." I couldn't believe her logic. I tried to explain to her that supporting local business doesn't equate to taking advantage of it. If we sold her that product at the quoted price, we would be losing money rather than gaining it. It's astounding how few people understand the mechanics of retail. For instance, when someone buys a $2,000 TV, they might think that the store makes $2,000 from that sale. In reality, we only make about $200. The manufacturer, Samsung in this case, takes the lion's share, which is roughly $1,800. Buying that TV might support the salary of one employee for one shift, but it doesn't give customers the right to come back years later and demand special treatment as if they handed us that entire $2,000. As I was trying to communicate this to her, I realized I needed to set clear boundaries. Since there were people defending her actions, it's worth mentioning that we did everything we could to accommodate her. We even offered to sell her the product in Canadian dollars without any margin, meaning we would have made neither a profit nor a loss. This price would have been lower than any other business in the country, yet she stubbornly demanded we honor the price quoted over the phone. At that point, a good employee needs to hold their ground. I reminded myself that I was there to help the company make money, not lose it. This customer was unreasonable, loud, and was demoralizing our new employee on his very first day, which was simply unacceptable. I'd never seen this customer before and have never seen her since, and I felt a sense of relief that we lost her business. It was a necessary sacrifice to protect the interests of the company and the well-being of our staff. Story 13. I was working as a supervisor in a coffee joint in a bustling mall on the first Saturday after Christmas, a busy time for any retail establishment. Just recently, we had a new manager join our team, and her arrival had shaken things up considerably. She seemed to have a newfound craving for power and quickly drove off many of the seasoned staff members, replacing them with the most apathetic teenagers she could find. As a result, while we were technically fully staffed, we were actually in a predicament. None of these kids had the faintest clue what they were doing. This was partly due to their lack of motivation to learn the ropes, and partly because our manager's idea of training during the holiday rush was essentially a joke. To put it bluntly, we were incredibly busy, and I was overwhelmed. I was pushing myself hard to keep everything running smoothly, but I desperately needed a break. Finally, I managed to steal a few moments for myself. Just 3 minutes into my long-awaited break, I was downing a glass of water and grabbing a handful of almonds to keep my energy up, hoping it would recharge me for the bad happening that lay ahead. That's when one of the teenager, aspiring SoundCloud rappers poked his head into the back and casually mentioned, "Bro, this dude wants to talk to you." With a heavy sigh, I replied, "I'll be out there in a couple of minutes. I'm on a break." The response I got was far from reassuring. "He said he doesn't care." Fighting my frustration, I waited a few more minutes, hoping the customer would lose interest. However, duty called, so I reluctantly stepped back out into the chaos of the cafe. As soon as I exited through the swinging door to the front, I was met with an unexpected sight. A middle-aged couple, both in their 40s, standing there with blended coffee drinks in hand. To add to the bizarre scene, they had two cute dogs nestled in a Victorian-looking bassinet, and they were glaring at me as if I were the source of all their problems. Before I could say anything, the man launched into a rant, demanding to know who I thought I was, taking a break during peak hours. "I'm sorry, sir," I managed to say, trying to keep my composure. "But I needed water and I needed food. I needed a minute." Instead of showing any understanding, he became more irate. "You're a terrible manager. Your employees are hopeless. This took forever." His rant was peppered with various sentences ending in capitalized adjectives, making it clear he was on a mission to scold me. I took a deep breath, attempting to stay calm. Sir, these are new hires. It's the holiday season. I am absolutely not the manager, just a supervisor, and we are doing our best. But then he said it, the phrase that would echo in my mind long after that day: get lost and your best isn't good enough. At that moment, the formality of sir went right out the window. I was done. You got your drinks. You're here only to unleash your anger on me, which is keeping me from helping all these other people who are waiting for their orders, so get out, now. It felt good to stand my ground, even if it was against someone who clearly thrived on confrontation. The couple stared at me in disbelief for a moment before storming off, their dogs yapping in protest as they left. 2 weeks later, I found my own way out too. The experience had become a catalyst for my decision to leave that job behind. I realized I didn't want to be in an environment that made me feel so little and unappreciated, where customers could berate me without consequence. I was ready to move on to something better, something that would allow me to thrive rather than just survive. Story 14. I had been a third key at a nationally despised video game store chain for almost 2 years when I finally got my long-awaited opportunity to tell someone to get out. Working there had been a roller coaster of emotions, from the excitement of the new releases to the frustration of dealing with customers who were more interested in causing trouble than actually making a purchase. To provide some context, we were gearing up for the release of the highly anticipated PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. As the countdown began, the backstock of the last generation systems were piling up significantly across the company. In response, the higher-ups decided to run a sale on these older systems, offering customers a free second pre-owned controller with their purchase. To promote this sale, the district manager mandated that we display stacks of brand new live systems prominently on the sales floor, making it clear that this was a deal not to be missed. One evening, as I was going through my routine, a gentleman entered the store and began poking around. I greeted him warmly, acknowledging his presence and letting him know I was available to assist. However, I quickly noticed his behavior was off. He began testing the doors of our display cabinets, checking to see which accessories were locked, and even pushed an empty display box for the Xbox One with his foot, seemingly searching for something hidden inside. My instincts kicked in. Something felt off about this guy. As I kept an eye on him, another customer entered the store and asked for a PlayStation 3 and a handful of games. I turned my back for like 45 seconds to retrieve the games from behind the point-of-sale drawers, but when I turned back around, I was struck with a sinking feeling. I noticed that a stack of Xbox 360s was suddenly 1 unit shorter. The tape on the box where the system used to sit had been reduced. Panic surged through me as I realized I was alone in the store and the suspicious man was nowhere to be seen. "Oh," I muttered under my breath, the weight of my impending failure weighing heavily on my shoulders. I could already hear my manager's voice in my head, ready to reprimand me for letting this happen. Defeated, I started toward the storeroom to grab a replacement system for my paying customer. Just as I was about to enter, I was startled by the unmistakable sound of squeaking styrofoam against cardboard coming from behind a display shelf full of Nintendo Wii games. My instincts kicked in again and I turned to my right. To my utter disbelief, I saw the same sketchy man on his knees with a black Xbox 360 stuffed halfway into his backpack. Completely bewildered, I couldn't understand why this man hadn't simply made a run for it after grabbing the system. Suddenly, it dawned on me, this guy was trying to steal my merchandise. Adrenaline rushing through my veins as I strode over to him and demanded, "What are you doing?" Caught off guard, he looked at me with the expression of a dog that had just been caught in the act of making a mess on the carpet. He stammered, "It said it had 2 controllers, so I was just making sure that it was in the box." With a dumbfounded look on my face, I pointed decisively toward the exit and shouted the words I had been waiting to say, "Get out of my store!" To my astonishment, the man pulled the Xbox out of his backpack, dropped it onto the floor, and sprinted out of the store before I could even reach for the phone to call security. In that moment, I felt a rush of triumph wash over me. I'd caught a thief red-handed and had successfully kicked him out without any loss to the store. As I looked down at the abandoned Xbox, I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. This guy had gone through all that trouble for a system that wouldn't even have yielded him more than 3 cents in trade-in credit at best. It was almost laughable now how desperate he had been, risking everything for something so petty. After a moment of disbelief and relief, I returned to my customer, who had watched the whole scene unfold with wide eyes. I reassured him that everything was under control and processed his purchase without further incident. Later, as I recounted the story to my coworkers, we all had a good laugh about it. I realized that sometimes working in retail meant dealing with the unexpected, and it was moments like these that made the job a little more entertaining, even if it came with its fair share of challenges. Alright, if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.